What's up, everybody? It's Max from the band KOZEN, and we're on the verge of releasing our new full-length album. It's going to be our first full-length, and there's kind of a story about how this is going to actually end up being the first one for us. And I thought I would go and tell that story, talk about how we got from where we started to where we are now. So that's going to be this video. Here we go. So as some of you know, if you're watching this, I'm in a band called KOZEN. I'm the lead singer and one of the guitarists in this band. And the way that this thing started out is kind of weird in that I started it as a solo project. This was something I was going to do on my own. I guess the way that this begins for me is that I was like a lot of other people. I'd always dreamed of being in a band, of doing music, of just making a life or a career or whatever out of being a musician and playing and writing my own original material and all of that. So it's the typical rock star dream, right? And I guess for various reasons, that never played out, and I never really worked up the courage and the nerve to really try pursuing it wholeheartedly and fully. So I went through, high school thinking that that's what I wanted to do, and I played in a couple bands here and there, right? Like I was doing, a little bit of metal stuff. I was doing a little bit of like hip hop and R&B stuff, playing with different artists and collaborating with them. But it never really took off to the point where I was like, I'm really going 100%, like fully embracing this. A big factor in that was my religious background, and I guess the very reserved traditional side of things, where a lot of the people who were influencing me were very, very opposed to the idea of being involved in modern music. It's that like hyper traditionalist thing, right? So for me, the journey was really about kind of making peace with myself, finding my own path, and kind of figuring out what I wanted to do. And it wasn't until I think like partway through my university years where I really started to notice the way that things were changing in the music world, and how some of my favorite artists were like kind of leaving the record label thing behind. Music was becoming a little bit, it was never that centralized in the first place, but it was really decentralizing and democratizing and becoming something that anyone could do if they had the resources for it. I'd done a little bit of audio training. I'd kind of missed out on the chance to do music school for various reasons. And of course, those were choices I had made. But I was now beginning to teach myself a little bit. I'd used other programs before, but GarageBand was turning out to be really easy to do. I'd been doing little covers and coming up with ideas here and there. But it was when a band I really liked called Falling Up did this thing called the Machine de Ella project, where they released, like, crazily 2 albums and an audiobook over the course of like a year or so, just recording it on their own, producing it on their own, and putting it out of their own free will on their own timeline. I thought to myself, I could do this. It might not turn into anything huge. It might not turn into a career, but I could put some music out there, and whoever listens to it, listens to it. And so I had gone through some stuff in like kind of the middle of my undergraduate studies, and I'd struggled with mental health issues a lot. I'd had to go to counseling and stuff like that, and I grew from that experience, but I needed an outlet to really put that out there and say, like, this is what I've gone through, this is what I've learned from it. And so out of that process, I decided that I would record 2 separate projects reflecting different sides of my musical identity and my preferences, my tastes and stuff. And those 2 projects became 2 EPs known as Exit Flesh and No Orphan. So Exit Flesh was like this really, really low budget. It was a no budget project, basically. I did this with just whatever I had around, the instruments I had handy, and the free GarageBand program. And it was so unplanned that like I never even properly printed it. Like the only real copy I have of this thing is like a CDR with like the tracks listed on the front of it. Like that's how bootleg this thing is. I don't even think I wrote the title. Yeah, so I wrote the title of this thing on the CD. And I was doing this under my own name. If you didn't know, KOZEN's my middle name. So I was doing it as Maxwell Kozen, and like solo metal projects, like they're not really a thing to be taken seriously. It was literally a bedroom metal project. And this was like heavily inspired by like grindcore and stuff like that. So this is a far cry from where I am now. I recorded that. It was 5 songs and like a weird experimental like noise track. And I made like this really bizarre lyric video that's on my other channel. I'll link to that here. You can watch it. But it was very cathartic to do that for me. I uploaded this thing to Mediafire, and I think it maybe got downloaded 30 times, something like that. It was really, really not a serious... To me, it was serious, but it was not like a proper release or anything like that. And I didn't know about distribution. I didn't know about Spotify, none of that. So it was out there for people to download the files for free off of Mediafire. Like, it was a ridiculous little thing. But it taught me that I could make something, that I could learn recording, that I could do something of that nature and actually make it viable. So the second thing to follow out of that then was me embracing the more melodic side of the music background I have and saying, okay, I could just do this thing where I scream and growl the whole time, but clearly nobody's listening to that. So the project that followed that up was called No Orphan, and this is very different than the version that you'll see on iTunes or any of like the distribution. It's a different cover. This was the original cover that my sister designed for me. Thank you, Rachel, for doing that. It was awesome of you. I think it was heavily based on the Max character for whoever. I think the character's name was Max, but I could be wrong. That could just be me thinking selfishly. But from Where the Wild Things Are, very obviously. But it was really cool to have artwork. And she really lovingly created this kind of pull-out thing for me, so it could feel like a real project. And again, that was like a 5-song deal. And what I did was I again went with the Mediafire upload, whatever. A lot more people listened to it than Exit Flesh because obviously it was a lot more accessible. But with this one, I also took it a little bit more seriously in creating like bonus content and extras for the download. And so what I did was I had the 5 core songs that made up the EP, and I also made instrumental remixes or reimaginings of those songs in a much more subdued, quiet, subtle, atmospheric vein. And I called that, I think the project, like the remix EP that accompanied it, was called The Captain Ethereal. Yeah, I had some interesting concepts going at the time. No Orphan kind of represented the first step in me actually finding the sound that I wanted to stick with. You know, that song would go on to be a little bit of like a paradigm, a format for what I would do going forward. And within a year, like I put that album out, or that EP out, and I went overseas to do some mission work. While I was there, one of my friends helped me film a music video for the title track of that EP, which is on my other channel. Again, I will link you to that. And yeah, No Orphan, that was like, for me, that cemented in my mind, like, wait, I could really do this. So when I got back home from traveling and stuff and kind of getting some work experience, I found myself, you know, I'd gone through a bunch of different experiences, different successes and frustrations. I'd learned, I'd grown as a person. And so it was like, okay, what's the next thing? And I wanted to do a full-length album, and this was the point at which I'd tried a couple jobs, a couple things that were more or less in line with what I'd studied and made sense with my career path, and I was like, this music bug though, like it won't go away, like I want to make something for real. And it was at this point that I discovered kind of like the online distribution thing and the streaming services and the downloads and all of that. It was like, oh, you could actually get it out there and like make money and people could hear it. So I got registered with SOCAN, I got registered with like distribution stuff online. I got No Orphan out there because I felt like that was actually representative of who I was as an artist, and I was going to keep doing this solo artist thing. And so my good friend Kyron Newbery, he stepped up and had heard a bunch of my demos and was like, listen, Max, you got to make this record. And we got together to do that in 2014 and 15. and we recorded an album. And what ended up happening to that album was that I couldn't decide on a sound. Like, I had musical ideas that were pulling me in every which direction. There was a lot of metal stuff, but there was a lot of pop, acoustic, singer-songwriter stuff in there, and a lot of electronic influences. And so I was being pulled in all these different directions, and I couldn't really... I ended up having essentially two halves of two different albums. And this is all the while me trying to learn better production. I had upgraded to more professional audio workstations and stuff like that. I'd been working with better equipment, and doing something that was a little more professional level. But this was a really steep learning curve for me. And what we ended up doing was taking the record and splitting it into two EPs. So initially there was a completely different album cover, and it was this one long album that made not even a little bit of a lick of sense. And so I took it down off the internet. I remastered the album a little bit. I redid the guitars. So obviously these things are not in order. I got new artwork done for two EPs. I added two new songs that hadn't been on the original release. And that became Swimming to the Stars, Part A and B. This is Part A, which is the one we actually got printed. The artwork, which is awesome, was done by Tyler Dukes. Thank you, Tyler, for being part of this band's journey. And this was the first time I was like, I've got printed CDs, and this is no longer a solo project, this is a band. So we reduced down from Maxwell KOZEN to just KOZEN. And it was at this point in time where the band went through like so many iterations at once that it was kind of crazy. So initially it was just me and Kyron playing all the stuff, recording the record. And during the process, I met a bunch of new musicians, some of them being John and Sid and a bunch of people in their squad. And I brought John on board to do bass for Swimming to the Stars. Sid did a little bit of piano on like one track, but most of the keyboard stuff on Swimming to the Stars that you hear is me doing that. And Jericho jumped in to do a bunch of guitar stuff. And a version of that band took some of the material from Swimming to the Stars and No Orphan, and we went out to Ottawa to do like a gig. It was like a church group that I knew that called us out to do that. And we did our very first show while I was still a solo artist with another singer by the name of Hannah, who was doing kind of her own solo stuff at the time. She's still doing awesome solo stuff. Just saw her perform last week, and she's like doing amazingly. We went out and did that, and that iteration of the band, it was like Sid was playing drums. I was kind of doubling between guitar and keyboard and like switching back and forth. Jericho was on guitar, and we were playing 6 strings at the time. And within a short little while, I met our manager, Brett, who really started pushing us to start playing shows. We played our first show as the band KOZEN, not as the solo artist Maxwell KOZEN. And we played that in Oshawa, Ontario. We played it at a venue called Wasted Space that doesn't exist anymore. We had Kyron, who had recorded the drums for the album, on drums. We had our friend Antonia on vocals, like singing backup with me. It was the only time we performed as the version of the band that actually can be heard on Swimming to the Stars, which is to say that it's me, John, and Kyron as like the main band. Shortly after that, Kyron kind of moved on to other things in life. He went back to school to do some further training for different work that he was going to do, and Jericho brought his brother Jared on board. And we became a new iteration of the band. Sid was on keyboard now, he was not a drummer. We wanted to solidify ourselves as a proper band now that we'd had member changes and that we were really doing this. So we decided to record a single, just a standalone single that would come out on its own. That song was called Barricade. This is the download card for that because we never printed that. Who prints a single? You know what I mean? Like, whatever. And we did a music video for that. It was our first proper music video that wasn't like some self-produced thing like the No Orphan video that I did for myself. This was like a really proper video. Shout out to Matt and Alexa for being in that for us, and to Alex from The Trenches for filming and editing that video. Did a fantastic job with it. And that solidified that we could go in a more metal direction and have that be a thing. One of the struggles I had throughout this whole process was like, do I want to be just a rock artist, or do I want to embrace the metal side of me? Because in my mind, I wanted to do something that could be like accessible to everybody. Obviously, I'd already seen the disparity between when you put out like a really brutal metal thing and when you put out a melodic poppy rock thing. There's a difference in the number of listeners you get, you know? And so that was a struggle for me for a long time. I thought that I would have to leave the metal thing to the side if I wanted this to be viable. And I learned eventually that that wasn't necessarily the case, and that we could bring together the best of all our various influences and still have it be viable. It was 2016 by the time Swimming to the Stars in its final form was out and the band had taken shape as a band. And then right after we'd played our first few shows, situations in life kind of pulled me away, and it was like, it's kind of now or never if I want to have family support to get my master's degree. So I moved to Michigan to do further theological studies. And there was a lot of frustration that came with that. I was like, I'm not sure this is 100% what I want to do. It's a good opportunity. Like, if I take this opportunity, it will be beneficial down the road. But it's not 100% what I want to do right now. I was really passionate about making this band thing happen. And it now was going to be very difficult to make it happen. And we'd already started writing new material. So over the course of the next 3-ish years or so, we are working via Google Drive. We were a band via the internet, and we would write songs, send demos to each other, and just work that way. I would come back to Toronto every once in a while to do shows, and at one of those shows we met Steven, SJK Audio. Make sure to check him out, great producer. And he offered to work with us, and it seemed that his work model would be doable for us. It's something that we would be able to vibe with that would accommodate our peculiar situation. And so we started working with him. You know, we would send him our files, we would record individually at home, and just like that, we had an album under works. And even though we ran into delay after delay in terms of actually getting the album out, we were able to do it properly. Like, we had a music video ready to go, we launched it well, we did a little press release and the video launch on a schedule, and we've been able to hype this album a little bit, book a release show, and it feels that over time, more and more, it's become just a real band. And this is something that started from me in my bedroom away at school or at home, just recording on GarageBand, to the point that now we're playing the Horseshoe Tavern this Wednesday, and we've got really awesome bands from around town and from other cities who are opening for us. And it's like, how did this happen? Like, how did this happen? It's been a lot of work, but it's been so absolutely and fundamentally worth it. And to have an album that like so well represents what we sound like, to have an album that is KOZEN, that is the accumulation of all of our musical influences and what makes them awesome, really mashed together, to have a full album with Sid playing keyboard on it, it elevates it. This album, it's Jared's drums, it's me and Jericho on guitars, it's just all of the things that really needed to be there to say, like, this is who we are and this is what we sound like. And finally, this thing where I've been putting out like 2-part projects, one is metal and one is not. Finally, all the pieces have come together for it to sound like a united whole idea. Something I should also mention, so Tyler, who did Swimming to the Stars, he did the art for this one as well. And I just want to point out how awesome these CDs are, because not only is the packaging cool looking, and like he gave us this circle theme to work with, or like he worked with us on this theme, but like the O's in the name KOZEN translate into these awesome CDs. And so with the new album, A Fearful Wonder, we had this mountain thing on the cover, and it was like, well, our new circle logo is mountain themed as well. It's like a mountain pointing up at like the sun or moon or whatever celestial object you want it to be. But look at how cool that is. Like, that is just, I am so stoked on that. This has been the journey of us coming from like my little solo bedroom project to an actual band with a CD coming out on all major platforms this Friday. And it's actually happening. I'm just excited for people to hear this album because I think it really is something special. It's unique. It's not like anything that I've heard anyone doing. Not to say that it's the most creative thing in the whole world, but this is our sound, and I don't think it's anyone else's sound, and I'm very proud of that. So thank you for watching this, for listening to me ramble about this musical journey that I've been on, and I'm grateful that you took the time to watch this video. There's all kinds of other content on this channel, so make sure you check that out. And I'm gonna go get out of this car because it's too hot in here and I'm tired. Anyways, all you guys take it easy. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with your friends. And we'll see you next time. This is KOZEN. We're out.